Good morning, everyone. We're so glad to have you with us on this first forum of the new church year. We're privileged to have with us this morning the author of an exceptional book published in April of 2020. Our Gay History in 50 States is even more ambitious than its title might indicate. It encompasses LGBT plus history in the DC and island territories, as well as the 50 states. It's a beautiful and engaging book, and it brings home the truth that LGBTQ plus history is indeed American history. Zaylore Stout, principal at the law firm of Zaylore Stout Associates, is an expert in employment law. He's also been a tireless advocate for LGBTQIA plus rights and led a successful campaign to establish a gender inclusion policy in St. Louis Park. His law firm has been recognized by the Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Journal with their Business of Pride Award. Just two items of housekeeping before I turn it over to Zaylore. If you have a technical question or a general comment, please use the chat function. If you have a question for our speaker, please use the Q&A function. And now, without further ado, Zaylore, please take it away.
Thank you so much. And thank you for everybody for attending this morning. I see Mark Waldorf is over here, a dear friend of mine, former member of the Quorum Board, and I believe recently got married, so congratulations on that. Awesome. So let me get my PowerPoint up so I can dive right in here with you. All right, so it looks like we're ready to go. Thanks again so much for your support of Reclaim, which is, I believe, what connected me and brought me here to you today. Reclaim provides mental health services to transgender and gender non-binary youth here in the Twin Cities. One of the things I loved about Reclaim and serving on their board was they provide these services to queer youth regardless of their ability to pay. And so I find that to be really important and impactful because access to mental health is really crucial and really important, and that's especially to the kids at this time where the national dialogue and discussion isn't necessarily something that's very affirming to their identities. So quick little overview in regards to what we're going to be going over today. I've done many talks in regards to LGBT history since I've written Our Gay History in 50 States, but I like talking about the intersection between, the LGBT rights movement and other social justice movements. And so one thing that I'm going to be connecting the dots today is with the African-American civil rights movement and the rights of LGBT folks here in this country. So I always like starting off by indicating that this is a safe space for people to be able to ask any and all questions. I am an attorney, but I also served as an HR consultant prior to going to law school. So I have that knack for wanting to be able to have dialogue and discussions with folks and to help people, perhaps realize different things. And so I always want to make sure that there's a safe space for folks to be able to ask those questions. So it's funny, I always like starting off this one. This is me, first day, first grade. So you always got to thank Mom for capturing these important moments in our life. And yes, that is a Tupperware lunch pail because that's what it was all about back in 1979 when I went to my first day of elementary school in Orange County, California, where I grew up, which was actually about a mile away from Disneyland. But as growing up, things happen, family divorce. So I ended up spending some time in Ventura, California as well, which is about an hour and a half north of downtown Los Angeles. And it's really a beach town, right? You can smell the saltiness of the ocean air. But much like my lived experience in Orange County, in Ventura, the community was very, very white, right? I think in elementary school, junior high school, there were maybe 3 Black kids in my school. By the time I went to Ventura, I think we ended up having 20 or 21. So there was more of a critical mass in Ventura for me to be able to, learn, about my Black history, something that wasn't necessarily something that was taught in schools. So this is 17 years old. I was maybe 95 pounds soaking wet, wearing my cross colors, and had my Walkman on my hip. And again, moving to this area, I saw my first skinhead in person in Ventura, right? I'd heard about them before in the 80s when I was in school, but it was something you saw on the TV and in the news, but not necessarily something in your community, but that was a presence for me there in Ventura. And so I actually started a Black Student Union. So the ability for Black students to be able to get together, to be able to work together, to be able to do fundraising events and hold Black History Month events in February, but also to be able to learn about ourselves and our culture, because it seemed to me that the folks that hated us because of the color of our skin knew more about our culture and our history than we did. So we did great Black History Month events, and that was the first for Ventura High School. So this is me 16 years old, at 16, 17 years old at this point. But there was the benefit in regards to all of us being able to learn about a more diverse perspective as it relates to our country's history. And that, different people from different races and religions and nationalities and genders made amazing contributions. And so, my goal was to be able to share more of that experience with my classmates. So we did fundraising events and bought books and added them to our libraries. But it didn't take long that there was a particular incident that happened that changed the dynamic for us in Ventura. So Rodney King had been beat up by the police, and this was caught on camera. So it was being replayed and replayed and replayed all over the news in 1991. And where I lived in Ventura, over here, Ventura High School, and where the trial was taking place for the police officers was only about 34 miles away. So it's really, really close. It was actually in the Ventura County, strangely enough, though the incident that resulted in the charges took place in Los Angeles County. And so there's a particular Thursday that I'll always remember, so we seared it in my memory. It was around 3:45, school had been let out. I had met with my college admissions professor at school. I had my college application in my hand. I was really excited about, my optimistic about my opportunities and my future and my prospects. And as I was leaving campus, let me mute this. Sorry, I've already done that. Friend saying, good job, good luck on the presentation today. And so when I was leaving campus, I heard the screeching of car tires, right? Right when I got to the curb to try to cross the street, I turned to look and was able to look just in time to see a skinhead jump out of a car, run up to me, yell nigger, punch me in the face, hop back in the car and take off. Now, I can still smell the burning of the car tires if I think about this incident long enough. But this is a situation that thrust me into the limelight there in the city of Ventura. Again, at the age of 16, 17, trying to, actually 16 at this point, trying to just be able to share Black history with my fellow classmates. We ended up having other classmates that were like, well, if you want a Black student union, then we should be able to have an Aryan student union. Sound familiar? Where folks can learn about Aryan history. And so I ended up having to, speak with the NAACP, speak in front of school board meetings. I even had gang members come up to me and say, well, we can take him out. We know who that guy is. We know where he lives. And I was like, no, that's not what I want. What I want is for us to be able to have access to our history. What I want is for people to be able to learn about the contributions that Black people have made in this country that have significantly impacted and bettered society for all of us. And my belief and thought back then in 1991 was that learning about history could help dispel hate, right? And that was something that, strangely enough, has been a through line in regards to my advocacy work into becoming an adult as well. So after graduating from Ventura, I left Ventura County and went back to Orange County, attended Cal State Fullerton. I think I was probably 155 pounds soaking wet by then. So wasn't as skinny and scrawny as a kid as I was back when I was in high school. But this is where I actually came out as a member of the LGBT community. And I remember going to the library at my college to see if there were lots of books there about LGBT folks and whether there was any text there that would show, the life experience of of Black folks in this country that are members of the LGBT community. And it wasn't necessarily something that I could find. I had to do all this extra digging, especially, to find, folks that were members of the Harlem Renaissance, right? And it's not like there was a book or a text that was there that had all of this information there for me to be able to learn about how my ancestors, fought and survived through this struggle of this intersection of identity, being Black as well as being a member of the LGBT community. And strangely enough, some of the hate. This is where I came to the realization that some of the hate that's directed towards Black people about something that they can't control about who it is that they are, is also some of the hate that is directed towards members of the LGBT community, right? Not being able to change who it is that they are, or conversion therapy being there trying to change people's, sexual orientation or gender identity. And so this is actually when I came to the realization that, as a young Black kid, right, that I had a certain amount of privilege, that I was able to learn about Black history at home with my family and my parents. But think about LGBT kids and how many of them are living and growing up in an LGBT home, right, where the parents are members of the LGBT community. Not many. So then the question becomes, how is it that we're going to be able to learn about our history, our LGBT history, if we're not able to have that benefit of being able to learn about it at home? It's not something that's taught in schools, right? And you kind of stumble into meeting other LGBT folks and acquiring your chosen family, which I think is amazing. But there's not always the passing down of that history for us, which is something that's really essential and I think is really crucial. And so, I love this picture now because there's so many more kids that are being raised by LGBT parents. There's a great friend that wrote a book where, it's talking about her daughter going to school and introducing the fact that she has, two grandfathers, right, that are married. So it's interesting how the times have changed in regards to some of this, but some things remain the same, that we don't have the ability to be able to learn about our history the way that, Black folks or folks from certain religious denominations, all those different types of things. So it's something that we have to remember and we have to think about as we move forward in regards to providing insight and access to folks in regard to their history. So fast forward to 2014, I'm on a road trip. Again, originally being from California and living here in Minnesota, I've done a gazillion road trips back and forth. And one of them was during the marriage equality debate times. And so Proposition 8 was still rolling in the courts. Proposition 8 was a proposition that was put forward in California, where they decided after the state Supreme Court had indicated that, that marriage had to be available for everyone. The proposition came up for the Californians to be able to vote whether they wanted to define marriages between a man and a woman. And they voted yes, so that's how they wanted it to go, with the support of a lot of money and backing from religious institutions. So that was still in the courts, right? Minnesota had become the first state to defeat a marriage amendment, which is amazing and great, and part of our great history here in the state. And so, at the same time that all of this was happening, there was a culmination of murders of Black men and Black boys at the hands of police. So we had, Michael Brown in Ferguson, you had Eric Garner in New York, where you heard him saying, "I can't breathe." And that was the first time that really became a public rallying cry. You had Tamir Rice in Cleveland, killed by police. And so for me, while I'm on this road trip, each time I cross a different state line, I'd ask myself, well, what relevance does this state have to LGBT history, right? Wyoming, I think about Matthew Shepard, of course, right, who was brutally murdered for being gay, right, for being a gay man. And then, when I cross over into Texas, right, I'm thinking about, Michael Byrd Jr., who was a Black man that was killed for being Black. And I'm thinking, these are two important aspects of my identity and two aspects of my identity that put me at risk, right? Compared to some of the other members of our community. I thought about, after these two men were killed, who was left in their wake? There were all these amazing women that were left in their wake. Here's two pictures of Mr. Byrd Jr.'s sisters and Matthew Shepard's mom, who then took on the rallying cry to fight to get federal hate crime legislation passed by Congress and signed by a president, which happened under President Obama in 2009. And so I ended up having the distinct privilege to be able to speak at the National Coming Out Day Luncheon that Quorum does every year, and it's coming up soon. So keep an eye out for getting some tickets at the event. It's always an amazing event. And Judy Shepard was there. Dennis and Judy Shepard, Matthew Shepard's parents, were there, and it was really hard for Judy to make it through her comments that day. And you know, it was because, you know, National Coming Out Day always ends up at the anniversary of her son's passing. And so by the time Matthew had died, which was in 1998, right, at 22 years ago, you know, Judy was going through and sharing her comments, and I remember at the end of the event, I was able to give her a really big hug. You know, the hug that you always give moms. And you know, it reminded me that there was this idea that I had, because I knew that, you know, if Dennis and Judy, cisgendered, straight, you know, white folks can dedicate their life, you know, and live the worst day of their life every single day over and over again for over 20 years now, that I knew that I needed to do more. So I had a dear friend, Dara Beavis, who's with Wise Ink Creative Publishing, which is a small independent publishing company that really works on social justice books and works. And I met with her and I was like, okay, I have this book idea. What do you think? And she said, this has to be a book that has to be done, and you have to do this book. And so within 2 weeks, I had met with Dara. Within 2 months, I started writing the book. And then 2 years later, Our Gay History of 50 States was born, just in time for the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots. And Stonewall was where LGBT folks in New York, you know, decided that they were going to fight back against police brutality, being arrested and having their photos and names printed in the newspaper so they'd be outed to their family and their colleagues at work and their congregations, you know, and so that is how Our Gay History of 50 States was born, and that's where we get to today. The book's been out for 2 years now. It's done really well, you know, winning different awards. There's 6 states that now require the teaching of LGBT history, and Illinois is one of those states, and they actually approved the use of my book for teaching LGBT history in their state. But now it's time for me to connect the dots in regards to, you know, the LGBT rights movement and the civil rights movement, which really culminated in the 60s, but again, started way and well before then. So, you know, what African Americans have been fighting for throughout the civil rights movement was, you know, the promise of America, right? They wanted the equality spoken about by our founding fathers and our founding documents, even though we were not, you know, thought of as equal at the time, and it was not the framers' original intent for us to have equal rights as those that came over, say, on the Mayflower. And so when you look at old videos and old images of the 1960s, you know, you'll see that there's a consistent message that's throughout that connects with the messages being brought forward by the Black Lives Matter movement and other social justice movements that are demanding equality and justice and fairness today, right? So, you know, equal opportunity, human dignity, fairness, right? For a Black man to declare, I am a man, as you see these men here wearing, you know, with these signs here, that was a defiant statement. It was a defiant move to do that in the 1960s, because there was always this belief and this perception and this intent to try to dehumanize Black and brown people and Black and brown bodies, where, you know, doing this and saying this in a declaratory fashion is saying, I am a man, I am a person, I am of worth, and I should be valued, right? And I love all these images where you can always see our allies, right? Right here in the middle, you see an ally here stepping up, putting his body on the line in regards to this rallying cry for equality. And so again, some of these same slogans at the time of the 60s are still some of the same ones you'll see today, right? Demanding justice, equality, accountability. And so we can't miss and forget the fact that during the LGBT rights movement, right, starting at, you know, at or around Stonewall, even though that there were lots of riots that happened before Stonewall. So Stonewall was not the first and definitely wasn't the last. But, you know, again, you'll see some of the same and similar messages during the LGBT rights movement in regards to things, looking for demanding non-discrimination, demanding equality, demanding human dignity. But then, you know, nowadays there's more of an intersection in regards to many of these communities. I remember watching the Women's March, right? All the pink hats, right after the election of Donald Trump, and also seeing, Black Lives Matter signs there, also seeing rainbow flags there, right? And people realizing that we're stronger together as we come together in regards to, demanding, you can't demand Black lives matter if you're not also going to demand that Black trans lives matter, especially the Black trans women that are being killed at an astonishingly higher percentage and rate based on their portion and their percentage of the population. But understanding and accepting the fact that none of us are equal until all of us are equal is really becoming more of the rallying cry for many of the individuals within the various and different social justice movements. And so, having the right to be able to marry the person that you love and not be discriminated against in the workplace or in your housing, those are testaments that have come up throughout the woodwork, right? You can get married on the weekend, but then you can get kicked out of your apartment depending on where it is that you left in the country, because the laws don't necessarily fully protect individuals that are members of the LGBT community, as the laws are on the books for other protected class groups that are in legislation that's been codified into bills and have been signed by presidents, right? Like the Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Movement, Civil Rights Act. And so there's certain images that really hit me really hard. And I remember when I first saw this image and it really hits home for me. One of these things never happened. It's very true that there was never a rainbow, drinking fountain in the 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s, where LGBT folks were required to drink from a separate drinking fountain. It's because LGBT folks were really, had to be closeted in order to be able to thrive and survive to the best of their ability during the time of our country's history, when it was illegal to engage in same-sex interactions, when it was illegal to wear clothes that corresponded with a different gender, when it was, illegal to sell a drink, to somebody that you knew to be homosexual, when, that the psychology associations in the country deemed, same-sex attraction as a mental illness, right? So there were all these laws that were on the books that really closeted folks and helped and made it challenging for folks to be able to live their true and authentic lives. So even though, this will not be an image that you will see when you look in any of the history books, we had things like the Lavender Scare that happened the same time as the Red Scare happened, when McCarthy was on the rampage trying to get all alleged communists out of our government. At the same time, they were getting rid of members of the LGBT community out of our federal government as well, because there was a fear and belief that, since they had this big secret tie, that if a foreign spy was to become aware of that, they could exploit that and blackmail LGBT folks in our government to be able to secure government secrets. And so, the Lavender Scare isn't something that's shared in our history books, but more folks lost their jobs and their livelihoods during the Lavender Scare than had happened during the Red Scare. Sorry, I'm trying to get this next slide up. There we go. This is one that I really like a lot as well. If you've never had the Supreme Court decide if you have the same rights as others, you have privilege. Now, I know that privilege ends up being a term that a lot of people push back against, right? Because the term makes it seem and appear as though the individual has had it easy throughout their entire life. Now, nobody's had it completely easy, right? There's challenges with coming from means, and there's challenges of not coming from means. But the other aspect is, are there certain elements of your identity that prevent you from having access, or provides an additional burden upon you in regards to the way that you are able to navigate life, right? So me as a man, I know that I have privileges in life and in this world as being a man, and that, I am not going to have a harder time getting through life by being a man, as opposed to women have additional hurdles that they have to overcome, and as well as trans individuals. So it's those different types of things we understand that, are there aspects and portions and elements of your identity that make it harder for you to be able to move forward in regards to that. And the Supreme Court decision aspect is always a really good one. It really brings it home for folks, because I'll have privilege as a man, but then I don't have privilege because I'm a Black man, right? being a member of the LGBT community, that there's challenges as it relates to that. But being a gay member of the LGBT community, as opposed to a lesbian, somebody who's non-binary or transgender, that there's privilege in regards to that hierarchy, right? And so I love the discussion in regards to intersectionality, and I love this intersectionality wheel as well, because it shows the 6 core elements of our identities in the middle, and then all these additional colorful aspects that add to our identities as well, which are also essential to our individual beliefs in regards to ourselves and how we see ourselves and how the world sees and views and interacts with us. So in the center, we have age, sexual orientation and identity, ethnicity, race, gender, physical abilities, and qualities. Whereas on the outside, there's some of these other areas, and certain ones I want to make sure that I highlight, right? We have, marital status, right? There's different aspects and benefits that come with marital to being married as opposed to not being married. There's appearance, right? There's lots of studies that show that, quote, attractive individuals, make it further and make more money, and all these different types of things are supposed to be happier, than folks that don't have, what society deems as being the most attractive qualities. Geographic location. This is one that I love to bring up as well. There's certain stereotypes and prejudices that come along with, having, let's say, a Southern drawl, right? Folks will think that you're uneducated, whereas there's folks from the South that have more doctorate degrees, right, than I do. And so these are things that we have to make sure that we're aware of and that we push back against, and we don't fall into, some of the preconceived notions that there are as it relates to this area. Now, I love the update in regards to the intersectionality wheel with this one, which is a wheel of power and privilege. And so it takes certain aspects and certain elements of our identities and broadens them out even more in regards to whether we're closer to the wheels of power as it relates to that sliver of our identity, as opposed to being further out and more on the margins. So let's say here in regards to education, right? Post-secondary, right? So you've gone to any type of college after high school, you're going to be closer to the wheels of power and privilege as it relates to that particular slice. You move further out, you have high school education and you have elementary school location, which is part of the more marginalized aspects. And areas I want to make sure that we highlight on this one, of course, skin color is an issue, citizenship, citizen, documented, undocumented. And you have here in regards to, cisgender men. So men whose gender identity corresponds with the gender that they were assigned at birth. So, I was assigned male at birth. I grew up to identify as a male, so I'm a cisgender man. So this is I'm going to be closest to the wheel of power as it relates to this particular slice. Cisgender women are in the middle here, and then transgender, intersex, and non-binary individuals are going to be on the margins as it relates to gender. So what I love about this one is you can identify where it is you're closer to the wheels of power in regard to this, and then it provides you with a roadmap in regard to the folks who you could best advocate for and serve as an ally with, right, in regards to any of these different folks from any of these different areas. So I love sharing these intersectionality wheels. And down here, Sylvia Duckworth is spectacular in regards to the content that she shares on Instagram. So I really encourage you to follow her work. She's an educator out of Canada. But racism, right? Racism is something, an element and an aspect that is and has always been part of the American experience. It's as American as apple pie, as some may say. But, and you don't have to go, we here in the Twin Cities don't have to go that far to see how racism and systems of racism can negatively impact certain community members, certain communities, broader and harder than it does for others. And so here we have, George Floyd Square, it wasn't that long ago that we lost George Floyd due to a particular interaction with the police, bringing to many people's attention an issue that had been discussed a long time within the Black and Brown communities in regards to the disproportionate use of lethal force against Black and Brown bodies in police interactions, and really demanding a change in regards to the way that police interact with us and what our expectations are as it relates to that equality in regards to interacting with police and being able to live to see another day, to live to have your day in court, which is how the system was originally set up and intended to be. But some of that hate, again, that's directed towards members of the LGBT, the Black and brown community is some of the same hate that's directed towards members of the LGBT community. If you've ever been to a Pride festivity, I've been to Pride festivities all across the world. These folks are always there, right? They're always there with their signs and indicating that they believe that their God is a God that doesn't believe in my existence and my ability to be able to live an out, open, and authentic life. And so, parlay this with this last year's worth of legislation that has been really directed towards being anti-trans. So there's specific anti-trans bills that were directed towards young people in athletics, but then they even broaden it out to being very anti-trans in regards to allowing for certain medical institutions and organizations to be able to not provide medical care or services to individuals that were either transgender members of the LGBT community or members of the LGBT community at large, indicating that there's, the religious exemption for these institutions to be able to provide services to folks in dire need, in some of the more darkest days of their lives. And so there's been 250 bills that have been brought forward in regard to that. And you can see that these are the states that have these that became law. I actually probably have to update this because I believe that we have had even more since then. But even here in Minnesota, we've had these types of bills be introduced. And then with some, bringing the data part in regards to some of the data here that we have and how intersectionality works as it relates to this. This is information and data from the FBI in regards to hate crimes and the reported data as it relates to hate crimes. So almost 60% of hate crimes or federal hate crimes have been motivated by race, ethnicity, ancestry bias. Almost 20% is religious-based, and that leaves almost another 20% as sexual orientation-based. So think if you're an intersectional individual, right? So let's say you are a Muslim woman who's gender non-conforming and is Black, right? There's a huge disproportionate percentage of your identity that could put you at risk as regards to being victims of hate crimes. And of course, the hate crimes, sadly, the hate crime aspects and elements have gone up over the last couple of years, which you would think would have been a different story, given the fact that we were in the middle of a pandemic. But that's sadly not the case, especially when you've had individuals at some of the highest positions in our country, engaging in some of this and sharing some of this, anti-equality rhetoric. So really quick, I want to make sure that I share and highlight some of the, Black LGBT activists that have been on the forefront in regards to speaking truth to power throughout the course of our country's history and connecting the dots in regard to the fact that there has always been this through line of Black and brown, queer individuals at the forefront of all of these social justice type movements. And I'll share some quick quotes for you in regard to them as well, and then open it up to some questions. So Angela Davis, a very famous Black Panther, one of the first women to be on the FBI's most wanted list, amazing educator, radical thinker. This is her on the cover of Time magazine back in 1971, is actually a lesbian, right? And she came out as a member of the LGBT community, I believe it was in the 80s. And so here's one of her quotes that she had in regards to the importance of being part of these types of social justice movements. I think the importance of doing activist work is precisely because it allows you to give back and to consider yourself not as a single individual who may have achieved whatever, but as to be part of an ongoing historical movement. And of course, she's been part of that ongoing historical movement, one of the co-founders of the Women's March that I referenced earlier that happened right after the election of Donald Trump. She has and will continue to be an important figure in regards to the movement. And if you didn't get a chance to hear her interview by the Angela Davis that has her show on Minnesota Public Radio, please check that one out. It was a very, very amazing interview. So Angela Davis interviewing Angela Davis. We have Bayard Rustin, who was the architect of the March on Washington, an out Black queer man back in the 1960s, in a movement that was really pushing a really important aspect and message and era, which ushered in a lot of change for our country. But there was a lot of pushback in regards to him and how much should he be in the front and in the limelight if he was an out gay man. But Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was like, nope, he's going to be here. He deserves to be here, and his insight is essential to the success of our movement. And Keep an eye out for, I think Netflix is working with the Obamas to come out with, either a biopic or a movie or a show in regards to Bayard Rustin's life. So here's his quote. If we desire a society of peace, then we cannot achieve such a society through violence. If we desire society without discrimination, then we must not discriminate against anyone in the process of building this society. If we desire a society that is democratic, then democracy must be a means as well as an end. I think it's amazing that I picked out, these quotes, 4 years ago now, and how they resonate so well with some of the things that are going on in this country today, especially with the insurrection that occurred on January the 6th. Malcolm X, right? I can't give you the whole story in regard to this. You're gonna have to get the book then to find out, how Malcolm X is connected with the LGBT community, but he is. And so the yin to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's yang, a member of the Black Panther Party, former member of the Black Panther Party, former member of the Nation of Islam, had a different perspective and approach in regards to addressing the racism that was happening here in this country. And so his quote is a lot more clear, short and succinct, and it states as follows. You can't separate peace from freedom because no one can be at peace unless he has freedom. We have Marsha P. Johnson, one of our foremothers of the LGBT rights movement, present during the Stonewall riots and cast as being one of the first people to throw a brick. And so, there were many members of the LGBT movement in the foundings in the very beginning who were transgender, non-binary, Black and brown trans women that were relegated to the sides and weren't included in the movement. And so I love that people have, brought back the importance of these important initial founding members. And so here's a quote from Marsha P. Johnson. I was no one, nobody from Nowheresville until I became a drag queen. That's what made me in New York. That's what made me in New Jersey. That's what made me in the world. And there were different times in in Marsha's life where she identified as being trans, as she identified as being a drag queen. At this moment, at this time when this quote was taken, she was identifying as being a drag queen. I love this one because we have 2 of the 3 founding members of the Black Lives Matter movement identify as queer Black women. We have Patrisse Cullors and Alicia Garza. And so it's always interesting to me that you have perhaps at times members of the Black community that are all for Black Lives Matter, but they're not for equality for LGBT folks. And it's like, but you're following a movement that's been established and set up by 2 queer Black women. How can you not want all of them to be free, all of them and their individual identities to be free as it relates to that. So this is always always interesting to me in regards to, having that be a part of the dialogue and discussion when having some of these challenging talks with members of the Black community. So here's 2 quotes that I have here. So Patrisse's quote is as follows. There's something radical and beautiful and deeply transformational in bearing witness to public accountability before the community gathered for the sake of wholeness. And Alicia Garza indicates in her quote, I say this to people all the time, the reason that we created Black Lives Matter in that way is because we wanted to build a sense of empowerment and self-determination. Early on in the development of Black Lives Matter, we set up some social media pages that were intended to offer information about anti-Black racism and state-sponsored violence, so people could really understand what it looked like in concretely in the present time. And I believe that's exactly what they've done, and one of the reasons why they were nominated for Nobel Peace Prize, just like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. DeRay McKesson is an amazing author. So if you're interested in another book, you can make sure you check out his, On the Other Side of Freedom. He live tweeted everything that was going on in Ferguson in St. Louis, in Missouri. He's always wearing his iconic blue Patagonia vest. And so his quote really gets to the element of his queer identity. So if you love me, if your love for me requires that I hide part of who I am, then you don't love me. Love is never a request for silence. I got 2 last quotes for you. Oh, this thing always doesn't show the second sets of quotes. I don't know why. But I will make sure that I email, text out, get to you guys the quotes from Andrea Jenkins, who is a member of our city council here in the Twin Cities, vice president as well. And her ward is the ward where George Floyd was murdered. And so I'll get that quote out to you, but she has a really amazing and beautiful quote, as well as Philippe Cunningham. I live in North Minneapolis, so the first trans man elected in our country's history anywhere. And so he has another important quote as well. I'm not sure why my little notes always end up missing out on those important ones. Somehow it disappears. But as we close, I like sharing the fact that, my belief in regards to being woke is a different belief and concept than others, right? Because I want people to be fully awake in regards to all aspects of people's identities and the various intersection of different social justice movements. So you can be woke as it relates to women's rights issues, but then you can be asleep as it relates to trans issues, right? Especially there are people within the women's rights movement that don't believe trans women should have the same and equal rights and equal access, and so there's different ways that you can be awake and still be asleep at the same time. And so hopefully today's discussion was able to help share and shed some additional light in regards to some of these other areas. Black History Month is not going to be the only month we should be learning about the contributions of Black and Brown folks. It's important for the identity of these kids to be able to know that they can be history makers themselves, and without seeing that reflected in what's shared in the schools, it's putting all of us, right, our entire society and our entire country and communities at a detriment. And the same thing with LGBT history, right? So we have LGBT History Month coming right up next month. So I'm excited. We'll be doing a lot of speaking events and everything as it relates to that. But there's a growing movement also to make sure that we're teaching LGBT history. We're making sure that we're including women in regards to what we're sharing, and disabled individuals and Native American history and the Hispanic history. We're in the middle of the Hispanic History Month right now. I think it benefits everybody. Because when you go to, if you've had the benefit to go to any of the elementary schools, junior high schools, or high schools lately, you'll look and see all this diversity there. But then sometimes, even within those same communities, you go to the grocery store, you go to the restaurants, you don't see that same diversity. So it's important for us to recognize that, our kids are growing up in a much more diverse world, right? I'm the first generation of folks, the Generation X that grew up in this country where segregation wasn't part of my lived experience. And so I want to have a different life perspective and a world perspective than my parents did. So it's same as going on each and every day with additional folks in regard to that. So here's some photos of when I first got my book in October 2019, and thinking about kids and making sure that they're reflected and represented in the books and in the text that we have. And it's important for all of us to make sure that we're doing our parts to make sure that we're sharing the best that we can and sharing a more authentic and true history for all of us to be able to understand and view. So I see that we have a question here. So make sure you type in your questions if you have those as well, because that's what this is all about. Is the anti-trans legislation in Minnesota current? Is there a bill on the floor? And is there an organization working to defeat it? Well, I know that Outfront is our state's largest LGBT advocacy organization. And they are working against any and all types of discriminatory bills that are being put forward. Minnesota, one of the benefits of Minnesota having a bifurcated legislature, being that one is run by the Republicans and one is run by the Democrats, is that this legislation can't just be rammed through without receiving some type of review and consideration by the other party. So the legislation that has been put forward by the Senate in regards to these areas, especially the anti-trans legislation, is not going to be making it through the Minnesota House. And so we don't have to necessarily worry about that at this point. But the fact that these bills are still being put forward still is important and alarming, and needs to be something that we're aware of. Because just like the amendment was put forward in regards to changing the state's constitution to define marriages between a man and a woman here in Minnesota, this is something that we defeated on a very close margin, and we were the first state to get it defeated as well. So that's important for all of us to make sure that we're aware and recognize that just because it hasn't made it past it doesn't mean that that's not something that could happen tomorrow. It all depends on who is in control of the House and the Senate, and then who is in the governorship, and all of that kind of stuff can make a difference. So getting something like the Equality Act passed is something that's essential and crucial, because the analogy that I can draw in regards to women's rights as well, right? We've had all these years of women having access to reproductive rights, and it was all hinged on a Supreme Court decision. There are points in our country's history where we could have passed legislation and got it signed by a president so that this would be codified into law. So you wouldn't necessarily have to, it wouldn't have to be contingent on the most recent court decision in regard to this area. Same thing in regard to LGBT rights. The federal LGBT rights that we have currently are from court decisions, right? The non-discrimination in regards to discriminating against folks in employment came from a Supreme Court decision. Access to LGBT folks to be able to get married also came from a Supreme Court decision. There have not been laws that have been passed by the federal government and signed by the president codifying these into law. So it's always stuff that's going to be contingent on the next composition of the Supreme Court. And so that's why it's important when we can to make sure that we're passing bills and legislation to be able to provide some additional protection and codify those laws there. Hey, Jackie.
If I could interject with a question of my own.
Absolutely.
The process of writing this book fascinates me and seems probably a transformative educational experience for lots of youth. Could you tell us a little bit about that process?
Oh, absolutely. I love that question. So one of the things for me to writing this book, I wanted it to be a community effort. So I ended up hiring an army of queer youth from across the country to help me do that preliminary research, because really what we were doing was researching each state's LGBT history, digging all of that up, and then making sure that it was, for me, then I would look and make sure that it was as diverse as the LGBT community I know that we have, right? So there were some states like Montana, the original research came back and there were no lesbians. And I was like, what? Out of the whole history of the state of Montana, there were 0 lesbians that have done anything important for me to be included in this book. I was like, I sent the researcher back to go back and do better. And they couldn't find anything. So then I came back and did some more research. But for me, it was important that I included queer kids and LGBT kids in this process so they could learn about their history and they could, be thanked in the book for being a researcher, but also, they could dig in and have some self-awareness as well in regards to the community. But I also wanted to make sure that the book was really diverse and that anybody that picked this book up could see themselves reflected in at least one of the entries in there. So that was a really important part for me.
That's wonderful. And among the things that we're told that we'll see in this book, and I haven't received my copy yet, but you talk about two-spirit people.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about LGBT in the context of American Indian culture and how that's viewed?
Yeah, sadly for me, there was a really tragic story to be able to learn about how colonialism has significantly impacted the Native communities as it relates to two-spirit individuals. So folks that are from our native siblings don't use the LGBT, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender language. That two-spirit individuals have always been important and revered members of their communities. And those are individuals that don't correspond to the stereotypical male and femaleness. So they're cast as embodying two spirits, so the male spirit as well as a female spirit, and they've always been like the most revered individuals within a community and within a tribe. And with colonialism and people using religion to be able to push the dogma that these individuals are deficient. Sadly, they've fallen in stature throughout the Native communities, and there's been a lot of work in regards to reclaiming their positions within society as it relates to that. So for me, it was really important to make sure that I included that as well in the book. So if you see one of the long LGBTQIA plus acronyms and you see a number 2 in there or a 2S, that's for Two-Spirit. And that's recognizing that that LGBT folks and Two-Spirit individuals have always been here since before the founding of this country. And so, you know, understanding that makes, I think, all the difference for some folks that think sometimes that this is just a trend or a fad as opposed to a lived reality for many of us, or most of us, or all of us that are members of the community. I see another question or something. Mark threw up in here, another shout out to NCOD event coming up, such a powerful, inspirational event. Yes, true. So Pastor Dwayne Davis is going to be one of the speakers. Love, 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 always hearing him speak. And so you can go online to grab some tickets as well. So that's absolutely true and great. And it looks like there is a copy of my book at the Plymouth Library. So yeah, my book's all over the place. And so if you're interested in purchasing a copy of the book and donating it to your old school, your library, a learning center, I really encourage that, because the people that can benefit most from this are those young folks and those kids. And those are exactly the individuals that I was thinking about when I was writing this book.
And we're asked, is there a curriculum guide that goes along with the book?
All the best questions here. Yes, there's actually free curriculums that we have developed by an educator that this is all that she does, and this is all the great work that she does in regard to this area. So you can actually download it at the website. So if you go to gay50states.com, you can download it for free. There's English language curriculum as well as health, and there's a general curriculum as well. So you can download those that are all age appropriate and meet the I'm trying to think of the standard that the schools use. Common Core. They meet all the Common Core standards and everything as well.
Thank you so much. I hate to draw this discussion to a close. We could stay here for a long time, but we thank you so very much for being with us this morning. And I want to alert you that we have another dedicated attorney and advocate on tap for next week. Graham Ojala-Babur is going to talk to us about immigration law from an attorney's perspective. So please join us again next Sunday. And again, thank you so much, Zaylore.
No problem, thank you. And Tom, you can, sorry, I just saw your question come in here, so I'll try to type in an answer if I can do that, or send me, I'll type in my contact information in the chat, and then we can connect later. Sorry, I missed that question.